Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we got something a little bit different. This is an idea that I saw floating around other YouTubers, and, well, I'll be honest, I stole the idea because it looks like a ton of fun. We're gonna plug in a popular franchise, and in this instance, we're gonna go from the worst, number 13, according to the critics, all the way up to number 1. But first, a couple quick disclaimers. First of all, people often get confused on how Rotten Tomatoes actually works. So this isn't the same as IMDb, where you get like a number score like a 6.2. That doesn't mean that on average critics give a movie a 6.2 out of 10. So I'll give you an example, The Terminator. The original Terminator is 100% on Rotten Tomatoes according to critics. And while that's fucking awesome, that doesn't mean that every critic that has submitted a review to Rotten Tomatoes gave the Terminator a 10 out of 10. What it means is 100% of critics gave it at least a 6 out of 10. Because on Rotten Tomatoes, anything 6 or above means that they would recommend the movie and it becomes fresh. Anything 5.9 or below means they would not recommend the movie or it becomes rotten. So basically on Rotten Tomatoes, it only asks you one thing. Do you A, recommend this movie, fresh, or do you B, not recommend it, rotten? So the way this video is going to work is I'm going to give you the critic rankings from 13 all the way to the number 1 movie. I'm going to give you the quick little one-sentence critic consensus on the website. And I'll also be giving you some of my own quick thoughts along with the audience ranking as we go along. And in that regard, you can decide who got it more right, the critics or the audience. But with all that in mind, we're going to get this started with the lowest of the low, according to the critics. Number 13, and excuse me, I will have my phone out for this video because this is a lot of stuff to remember. But at number 13 is going to be the conclusion of the Cult of Thorn trilogy, The Curse of Michael Myers. This actually comes in at an 8% critic, which means out of every 100 critics that reviewed this, only 8 of them would actually recommend it. And the critic consensus for this one was, The Curse of Michael Myers trades the simple, brutal effectiveness of the original for convoluted mysticism with disastrously dull results. And right away, guys, me personally, I already have an issue here, because while this movie has a ton of problems, even though I'm a slight defender of it, I get some guilty pleasure out of this. You have a badass Michael Myers with George P. Wilbur turning in a pretty good performance. I generally like the look of Michael, even if he's a little puffy in this movie. You have a couple of the best kills in the franchise. You have the last appearance of Donald Pleasence as Loomis. You have Paul Rudd going fucking apeshit crazy. And you have some good atmosphere in the movie. For me, personally, there is no way this would be the worst of the worst when it comes to Halloween. But my big issue with their consensus is that last little part where they say disastrously dull results. Now listen. You can point to a million issues with this movie, and I get it. I'm not here to say it's great, but using the word dull for Halloween 6 makes absolutely no sense. For all the issues the movie has, for better or worse, it is entertaining throughout the entire runtime, just because it's so batshit crazy. So personally, I think the critics are off to a pretty rough start here. Dull is never a word I would use to describe Halloween 6. Convoluted, sure. Crazy, yes. Audiences were definitely more forgiving on this one, giving it a 36 out of 100. And while the critics have this at number 13, a 36% for audience is good enough to put it up to number 10 in the franchise. And with me being a defender of Curse of Michael Myers, I'm more in lockstep with the audience as opposed to the critics here. So that's 1 point, audience. Next up at number 12 on this list with a 10% critic score is gonna be, you know it, you love it, Trick or Treat, motherfucker, Halloween Resurrection. And the critic consensus on this one is, the only thing this tired slasher flick may resurrect is nostalgia for when the genre was still fresh and scary. I mean, I can't disagree with that. It's not really saying much about the movie, but I can't disagree with the consensus. This is always an argument for the worst Halloween movie. It's between this and one or two others, but this is always in the conversation for the worst Halloween movie, and mainly it's because the opening 15 minutes and the closing 15 minutes. Like the stuff in the middle, sure it's generic, but it doesn't really do anything to piss me off. But opening the movie by retconning all the events of H2O, disrespecting Laurie Strode, is just something that is borderline unforgivable for Halloween fans. And of course, the end of the movie, you have Busta Rhymes coming in, kicking the shit out of Michael Myers, electrocuting his nutsack. This movie is real bad. Kind of feels like an MTV real world vibe going on in the middle. I mean, there's a reason you almost never hear Defenders of Halloween Resurrection, and that's because it is a horrible entry in this franchise, among some other bad ones. While critics landed at 10%, audiences were slightly more forgiving at 24%, but that is still bad enough to land this in 13 out of 13 in the audience ranking. And I can't really give a point to either here because, I mean, they both agree it's bad. While critics have it at 12, audiences have it at 13. So I'm not going to really give a point to either one here. We'll call this one a draw.
Trick or treat, motherfucker.
All right, coming in next for critics at number 11 with a 12% rotten is going to be Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers. And the consensus on this one reads, Halloween 5, The Revenge of Michael Myers finds the series embracing crude slasher conventions with pedestrian scares, disposable characters, and aimless plotting. And again, I'm gonna have to kind of agree with the critics on their consensus here. This is another one of the movies in the franchise that always battles for my least favorite. And while Halloween Part 4 felt like it was trying to get back to feeling like a Halloween movie, this one, you had the Accords bring in like this French director that fully acknowledged he didn't watch the Halloween movies. He's just trying to make like a generic slasher. And it just got so much about the character. It got so much about this universe wrong. I mean, he didn't even get the Myers house right. For some reason in this movie, it's now like a mansion for no reason. You have Michael Myers taking off his mask at one point and shedding a tear, which just goes against everything that Michael Myers is. He's supposed to be like this shape of evil, this husk of a human. He's supposed to be devoid of emotion. So they just got so much wrong in this movie. Of course, you replace the incredible Rachel. You kill her unceremoniously in the first 25 minutes. You replace her with this insufferable Tina character. You have the damn cops where every time they're walking around, it's playing this clown music for no reason whatsoever. This movie just missed the mark in so many ways as a follow-up to Halloween 4. Although I do appreciate Donald Pleasance just going 100% balls to the wall in this movie. Cookie Woman! The only thing positive I can really say about it is I do like the Jamie Lloyd scene in the laundry chute. I think that's one of the more iconic moments in the Halloween franchise. But everything else, including that damn alien Nicolas Cage mask that would have at least looked better if they would have just fucking tucked it in. Everything else about this movie is pretty horrible. Again, audiences were a little more forgiving just because that's kind of the nature of the beast. Audiences tend to be more forgiving on bad movies than critics. So while the critics gave this a 12%, audiences actually have this tied with Curse of Michael Myers at a 36%. Just because I prefer Curse, I'm going to put it one up on the list. So far audiences have Halloween Resurrection at 13, they have Revenge at 11, and they have Curse at number 10.
Cookie Woman. Cookie Woman.
Alright, up next at number 10, critically at a 25% rotten, is gonna be what on most days is my personal pick for my least favorite Halloween movie, and that is gonna be Rob Zombie's Halloween 2. And the critic consensus on this one is, Zombie shows flashes of vision in this follow-up to his Halloween reboot, but they are smothered by mountains of gore and brutal violence. I don't know what to do with that. Like, yeah, it's the Halloween franchise. What movie did you expect to watch going in? It's not a Christmas movie. It's not Citizen Kane. It's Halloween. Blood and gore is kind of what makes some of these movies great. The part I disagree with here is the first part where they say he shows flashes of vision. I'm sorry, but no. Obviously, there was this whole dispute with Rob Zombie and the studio interference in the first movie that really turned off Rob Zombie to making a sequel. He agreed to come back only if they let him do his own thing. And oh boy, he definitely did his own thing, all the way down to the damn white unicorn. I have so many issues with this movie. Michael is way too visceral, and like the way he's stabbing people, hearing his loud grunts. You have him essentially being more of just like a wandering hobo instead of Michael Myers, only really putting on the mask when he kills people. You have Laurie and Loomis, who are both completely insufferable in this movie. Like, they are not characters you root for whatsoever. The only thing I really liked about it was the opening 15 to 20 minute dream sequence in the hospital. I think if the entire movie was done more like that, more like the conventional Halloween 2 with Laurie trying to get away from Michael in the hospital, this would have been a much more successful sequel. And while critics have it at a 25%, Audiences were a little more forgiving with it at a 44. So this one is going to land at number 10 for critics, and actually a spot higher at number 9 for audience scores. And this one, when you do the 25% critic, the 44% audience, I'm actually going to give the point to the critics. Considering this is my least favorite Halloween movie, I think 44% is way too high, so this point goes to the critics. Now, next up at number 9 on this list is going to be Rob Zombie's Halloween 1, and we're looking at a 28% critic score, much more forgiving with the audience at a 59%, only 1 point away from being classified audience fresh. And the consensus on this one is Rob Zombie doesn't bring many new ideas to the table in Halloween, making it another bloody disappointment for fans of the franchise. Again, I think this is the biggest consensus I disagree with since Curse of Michael Myers. Like, to say that Rob Zombie doesn't bring any new ideas to the franchise is just wrong. The entire first act of this movie, which for the record, I hate, but that is an extremely new take on Michael Myers. I do agree the back two-third is pretty much a more violent, a more bloody retelling of John Carpenter's movie, but to say there's like no new ideas here from Rob Zombie, I would disagree with that. And by the way, this is coming from somebody who fucking hates Rob Zombie, but he did try something new, even if it didn't work for me. But as far as a percentage, we have 28 to 59. I think 59 is way too high for this movie, but if you take out that first act, I am more in lockstep with the audience score here, although I would still bring it down a little bit. The back two-thirds of this movie, I think, are pretty enjoyable. They're pretty watchable. There's a fan edit on YouTube that just kind of starts with Michael Myers in the police car, and it is way more enjoyable than this actual movie. So plugging this one into the audience score, while it is number 9 critically in the franchise, this is all the way up at top 5 for audience, in at number 5. Alright, now next up at number 8 critically, and this is the first entry I think is going to really piss some people off, but all the way down at number 8 is the original Halloween 2, the follow-up to Halloween. This is a critic score of 34%, and an audience score much better with a 63%. And the consensus on this one is Halloween 2 picks up where its predecessor left off and quickly wanders into a dead end that the franchise would spend decades struggling to find its way out of. Now, I can't completely disagree with this critic consensus, especially if they're referring to the whole Michael and Laurie brother-sister storyline, which John Carpenter has said he hates. You know, dude had to do something with the sequel. He downed a six-pack one night. That's the story he came up with. And while I don't personally like it either, I think it gives Michael a motivation that he shouldn't have. It doesn't completely ruin this movie or this franchise for me. And it is kind of ironic for this movie that while it's been acknowledged that Friday the 13th is a total Halloween ripoff, Halloween 2 kind of ripped off Friday the 13th when they upped the violence, they upped the kills, they made it a little more viscerally exciting, even though of course, we all prefer the tension and suspense of the first movie. And this is one that would be higher on my personal list. I really enjoyed this follow-up to the original Halloween. I think they work very well as like a 1-2 punch, all taking place on the same Halloween night. And for critics to have this all the way down at number 8 at only a 34%, is fucking criminal. Without a doubt, I am giving this point to the audience. And with their 63%, while this would be number 8 for critics, this would be all the way up at number 4 for the audience score. Next up at number 7 is gonna be finally our first entry from the new David Gordon Green trilogy. And did you think it was Halloween Ends? 'Cause you're wrong. Evil dies tonight. In at number 7, we have Halloween Kills with a 39% critic score and a 66% audience score. Before I even get into it, this point's going to the critics. I pretty much hate Halloween Kills, other than how brutal Michael Myers is himself. I pretty much hate everything else about this movie. All the dialogue is way too over the top, way too Shakespearean, like they think they're in a deeper movie than they actually are. The movie doesn't really do anything to move this trilogy forward whatsoever. And I mean, by now we all know the mob mentality stuff in the hospital, chasing this 4'10" guy saying it's Michael Myers is just awful.
Hey, doesn't this guy deserve a fair trial?
You, back of the mob.
Back of the mob? What? This is my spot. I came early.
Okay, out of the mob.
This mob blows.
I mean, I like Michael in the movie. I love Big John and Little John and their comedic relief they bring. I think Judy Greer was much better this time around than in Halloween 2018. But that's about it for positives for me. The consensus on this one reads, Halloween Kills should satisfy fans in search of brute slasher thrills. Absolutely true. But In terms of advancing the franchise, it's a bit less than the sum of its bloody parts. And personally, I would agree with this critic consensus. This movie does nothing to move this trilogy forward. It has way too much like social commentary that just doesn't belong in a dumb horror franchise. And these are some of the dumbest characters I've ever seen in any horror movie. And that's saying a lot. So while critics have this one down at number 7, the audience score would actually put this at number 3. And I don't know what y'all are smoking, but this point is going to the critics.
Evil dies tonight!
Evil dies tonight!
All right, evil dies tonight! That evil dies tonight!
All right, next up at number 6, in a score that I think is way too low for both critic and audiences, but number 6 is going to be Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers, with a critic score of 39 and an audience score of 54. And the critic consensus on this one reads, Halloween 4, The Return of Michael Myers may bring the series' mass killer back into the fold, but fails to offer the visceral scares and inventiveness of the original. And my main issue here is way too many of these critic consensuses, is that how you say that? They're comparing every movie in the franchise to the original, and you can't do that. Like, if you compare every one of these movies to the original, they're all gonna suck. And that's just not the truth. I am a huge defender of Halloween 4. I think it has the best Halloween season vibe of any movie in the franchise, including the original. It introduces 2 of the best characters in the entire franchise, with Rachel and Jamie Lloyd. I love their relationship. You have the return, of course, of Donald Pleasance as Loomis, a total badass in the movie. And I just think this movie gets a lot right. The only thing that really sucks about it is the look of Michael Myers. And I think audiences in general weigh the look of Michael Myers way too heavy in these movies. Except H2O. That's unforgivable. Like, if Michael Myers looks good, people give this like an extra 20 points. If he looks bad, they take off like 30 points. It's crazy. Like, there are more to the movies than just the look of Michael Myers. I acknowledge he looks ridiculous in this movie. His mask wasn't as advertised. He has on these dumbass shoulder pads for no reason. But aside from the look of Michael Myers, I like how he has a plan here. You know, he takes out the power of the city. He takes out the police station. He takes out the mob. Like, Michael Myers has a plan of action in this movie. I love the characters. I love the kills. I love the atmosphere. This is one of my favorites in the entire franchise. Like I said, I'm going to agree with the audience simply because their score's a little bit higher at 54 than the critics at 39. But I think for both, this movie should be higher. And even though the critics have this at number 6, the audience have it one spot lower at number 7, even 15 percentage points higher in the ranking, because audiences are just more forgiving on this franchise as a whole. Alright guys, we are now in top 5 critic territory, and yes, there's one movie that hasn't been said that's gonna piss you off. It pisses me off. But we are finally at the conclusion of the David Gordon Green trilogy. At number 5 is Halloween Ends, with a critic score of 40% and an audience score of 57. And the consensus on this one reads, Halloween ends with a frequently befuddling installment that's stabbed, slashed, and beaten by a series of missed opportunities. Now let me fix that consensus. Halloween actually ends with a story that has nothing to do with Laurie and Michael, and instead focuses on a shoehorned romance between a new character, Corey Cunningham, and Laurie's granddaughter, Allison. I know some people out there love it for how different it is, and I get taking that chance in maybe a middle part of a trilogy, but to end your trilogy and to build up all the marketing on a final showdown of Laurie versus Michael, and then to only give that moment like 7 minutes at the end of your movie, it just makes no damn sense. There's no way you can justify that decision to me. And after you had an entire movie of showing what an unstoppable killing machine that Michael is, this one has him hiding out in a sewer, being this weak old man that Corey just like tackles and takes the mask off him.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
I love the young people.
This movie's ridiculous. There's almost nothing redeeming about it. You know, I admit it's shot competently, it looks pretty good, but they got the character of Laurie completely backwards in this trilogy. Like in Halloween 2018, where she hasn't seen Michael for 40 years, you have her like locked away in her house, training for the day she sees Michael. And in this one, after her daughter is killed, she gets over it. She writes a novel and she's like, you know what? I'm done with fear. I'm done with Michael. Who gives a shit if he killed my daughter? I don't understand the decision. Why not have Laurie 40 years later at the beginning of the trilogy, not worrying about Michael until he breaks out, and then in this movie, have her wanting to hunt the son of a bitch down? Makes absolutely no sense. COVID really ruined this movie. They had too much time to think about things. They changed a bunch of stuff. And as a result, this is what we got. This isn't how you end a trilogy. This isn't how you end Michael and Laurie's story. So with the critic 40% on this one, I'm going to have to agree with the critics. Even the audience giving it a low score of 57%, personally, I still think is too high for this movie. And while it's number 5 critically, that 57% is good for number 6 on the audience list.
It's Halloween. We're gonna have a good time tonight.
All right, guys, up next at number 4 with a 51% critic score, we're almost getting to fresh, is going to be the black sheep of the Halloween family, aka the one without Michael Myers. And that is, of course, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. And the critic consensus on this one reads, its laudable deviation from the series formula notwithstanding, Season of the Witch offers paltry thrills and dubious plotting. Why can't you guys just say it's kind of a cool movie? I'm a big fan of Season of the Witch. People, when this movie came out, people absolutely hated it. They weren't exactly clear with their marketing that Michael wasn't going to be in the movie because they wanted the money. They wanted people to go see this. And I understand why people were pissed when it came out. I do think it's getting a bit of a cult classic status, but honestly, I've always been a fan of Season of the Witch. Dr. Dan Chalice is a total badass. Tom Atkins. You know, this is when John Carpenter still wanted to go the anthology route before people kept screaming for him to bring back Michael Myers. And I really like this Halloween story. It's batshit crazy. I fully acknowledge that. You have a dude like stealing Stonehenge, doing this whole plot to like kill all the children in the world. You have this town of androids trying to kill Dr. Chalice. It's fucking strange. There's nothing in this that feels like the rest of the Halloween series. Maybe that's what I like about it so much. This is an absolute palate cleanser. Most audiences don't agree with me, because while critics gave this a 51, this is at a 30% audience score. I'm gonna have to agree with the critics here. I agree more with the 51 than the 30. Like, if you take Michael Myers out of the equation, if you can look at this as just a standalone film, I think it's a pretty good 80s horror film. If you haven't watched this in a long time and you didn't like it, go back without the Michael Myers glasses, and tell me what you think, because I think it's good. And while this is number 4 for critics, this is all the way down at number 12 for audiences at a 30%. Can't agree with that at all. This is another point for the critics.
Happy, happy Halloween, 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 happy, happy Halloween, silver shamrock.
All right, guys, we're now in the top 3 of the franchise. And for the most part, this is where critics and audiences are kind of on the same wavelength, give or take a few points. But in at number 3, critically with a 56% and an audience score of 49%, is going to be Halloween H2O 20 years later. And the critic consensus on this one is, Halloween H2O is the best of the many sequels, yet still pales in comparison to the original Halloween. Again, I've talked about this. Stop comparing all these movies to the original Halloween, or you're not going to enjoy any of them. And for me personally, I will admit this movie has lost a little bit of its luster as time has gone on, as, you know, more time has gone between me and the movie. I still enjoy it, but it's a little bit too clean for me. It doesn't have like the grungy feel of a Halloween movie. It is clearly a Scream ripoff. They were trying to capitalize on the success of movies like Scream, Urban Legend, I Know What You Did Last Summer, like that whole era of movies. This feels more like a 90s horror movie than anything resembling Halloween. And not to mention the performance by Chris Durand, no offense, and the Michael Myers masks in this movie are hands down the worst of the entire franchise. But what I will say is this is my favorite Laurie Strode of any Halloween timeline. Like, I know that might be an unpopular opinion, but I prefer this Laurie even over young Laurie from Halloween 1 and 2 and the David Gordon Green trilogy. You, of course, had Josh Hartnett in here playing Laurie's son, and I really like their relationship, their dynamic in the movie. I do love the third act of this film. The third act of H2O, one of my favorite acts of the entire franchise, but it's everything that's kind of leading up to that. A lot of like the PG moments, we don't get to see a lot of the kills. And it's just a shame because I do think there's a version that exists that you could make this movie darker. You could show some more brutality with it. And this could have been like my number 2 or 3 favorite Halloween movie. Like I said, they're pretty in sync wavelength wise. Critics have this at a 56, audiences at a 49. Again, I'm going to agree with the critics a little bit. And while that 56% critic score is good enough to make this the number 3 Halloween film, the 49 audience lands this all the way down at number 8. So again, I'm definitely with the critics here. All right, guys, in at number 2, by process of elimination, you know what's left, and you know this ain't Halloween 78. So this is going to be Halloween 2018 with a critic score of 79%, the first certified fresh on this list, one of only two, and an audience score of 72%. And the critic consensus here reads, Halloween 2018 largely wipes the slate clean after decades of disappointing sequels, ignoring increasingly elaborate mythology in favor of basic yet still effective ingredients. And I 100% agree with that consensus. Halloween 2018 is a pretty badass Halloween film. I don't know how David Gordon Green went so wrong after this movie, but this first one, pretty badass. James Jude Courtney might be my favorite portrayal of Michael Myers. The mask looks great. The one-shot sequence is truly incredible and very chilling. I like the Laurie direction here, even though it's a bit over the top. I can't say I love it, but I like the Laurie story here. I love the character of Andy Matichek as her granddaughter Allison. I do think there's a little too much Danny McBride seeping into this script. It's a little too over the top comedically, where Halloween Kills, I'll say that's one of the few things it does better. It tones down the comedy, kind of just saves that for Big John and Little John. But everything else about this movie really worked for me. Had a great third act final showdown. Even though I think they should have killed Laurie in that third act, I think that would have been a really good, gut punch. If it wasn't for Kills and Ends, this would probably be my favorite timeline, hands down, of Halloween 78, 2018, and then we'll say Kills and Ends don't exist. I would probably land on an 8 out of 10 for this movie at least. So again, I'm going to have to give this point to the critics. This is number 2 critically, and at a 72%, it's also number 2 audience-wise.
Do you know that I pray every night that he would escape?
What the hell did you do that for?
So I can kill him.
But everybody, we all know what it is. Number 1, critically with a 96%, is going to be the OG Halloween from 1978. Actually an 89% audience score, which for me, I'm shocked. That feels a little bit low audience-wise. I thought this would be like a 95% minimum. But the critic consensus on this one reads, scary, suspenseful, and viscerally thrilling, Halloween set the standard for modern horror films. Absolutely agree once again. While this wasn't the first to do it, you had Black Christmas, you had Psycho, you had Peeping Tom, movies like that came before Halloween. This is the one that kind of set the precedent for 80s slashers going forward, made horror movies what they were for an entire decade and a half. And there's just nothing I can say about this movie that hasn't been said a million times over. You have the character of Michael Myers, one of, if not the most iconic slasher of all time. You have Donald Pleasance as Loomis, a brilliant exposition character that somehow doesn't feel like exposition. Every time he's on screen, you are gripped. I mean, I could make the argument that he's actually the main character of this movie, even more so than Laurie Strode. It almost feels like Captain Ahab trying to get his Moby Dick in a sense. But you also do have the great Jamie Lee Curtis starting her legacy as one of the greatest scream queens of all time. And this is just a movie that didn't need violence. It didn't need over-the-top kill sequences or blood splatter. This is a movie that is just the perfect example, the textbook example of how to build tension effectively. This entire movie, you just get glimpses of Michael Myers where you're waiting for him to make his move, you're waiting for him to strike, and all of that leads to the ultimate third act payoff, maybe in horror movie history. This movie was just simple, yet so damn effective in what it was doing. And there's a reason that people still, 46, almost 50 years later, point to this as one of the cornerstones of how you do a horror movie the right way. And unfortunately, this is going to be another one that I'm not really going to decide, because I don't know if I would give this a 10 out of 10. I'm somewhere between a 9 and a 9.5. And they're both so damn close with a 96 and an 89. This is a coin flip. I'm not going to give this one to the critic or the audience. So as I gave you the critic rankings as I went through this video, I will read off the final audience rankings for you right now. 13, we had Halloween Resurrection. Number 12, we have Season of the Witch. Number 11, Revenge of Michael Myers. Number 10, Curse of Michael Myers. Number 9 was Rob Zombie's H2. Number 8 was H2O. Number 7 was Return of Michael Myers. Number 6 is going to be Halloween Ends. 5, Rob Zombie's Halloween. Number 4 is Halloween 2. Number 3 is Halloween Kills. Number 2 is Halloween 2018. And of course, number 1 was Halloween 1978. All right, guys, but that's going to do it for this video. Let me know down in the comments, are you team critic with their scores or team audience? I'm going to have to go back and check my math when I do the edit. But from what I said in this video, I think I'm more on the critic side of things, and that is truly shocking for me. But other than that, guys, do all the YouTube stuff. Leave a thumbs up to let me know you like this kind of video. I could do more of them going forward. Friday the 13th, Star Wars, MCU, whatever you want to see. Drop a comment. Let me know who you agree with more in this video, and let me know how you rank the Halloween franchise. And of course, subscribe right down here so you don't miss any future content on the channel. And as always, we'll see you in the next one. Anything to say, Michael? He's got nothing, guys.